Hey there, chess fans. Welcome back to the channel where we dive into the wild, weird, and sometimes wonderfully ordinary world of chess games. Today, we're looking at a battle between opponent and OngoleBull, and spoiler alert, black comes out on top. Let's jump right into the opening phase and see how these two danced around the board. e4 and e5 kick things off in the most classic way possible. Nothing fancy, just good old-fashioned control of the center. Then knight f3 and knight c6 follow suit, standard development, knights out, bishops waiting in the wings. White's bishop c4 and black's bishop c5 mirror each other perfectly, setting up that timeless Italian game vibe. Knight c3 and knight f6 continue the symmetrical dance, both sides developing pieces and eyeing the center. White's d3 is a solid, if somewhat cautious, choice to shore up the center and open lines for the bishop. Black responds with short castling kingside to safety, and white follows with short castling as well. So far, so textbook. h6 from black is a little eyebrow raiser. It's a prophylactic move, stopping any pesky bishop g5 pins, but it's not exactly urgent here. White replies with h3, mirroring the idea and preventing any knight or bishop visits to g4. Black's d6 shores up the center and opens the way for the light-squared bishop, and white's a3 is a slow, quiet move, probably aiming to prevent any knight or bishop hops to b4. Then black's bishop e6 steps up the pressure, challenging white's bishop and trying to trade off some pieces. White obliges with bishop takes e6, and black recaptures with f takes e6. This pawn capture slightly changes the pawn structure, but nothing too dramatic yet. White's knight e2 is a bit of a retreat, maybe aiming to reroute the knight, but it's not the most ambitious plan. Black's knight h5 is a bit more aggressive, eyeing some potential kingside action. White's bishop e3 is where things start to get interesting. The engine isn't thrilled here, suggesting that a better move would have been knight c3. This bishop move allows black to capture on e3 with bishop takes e3, and after white recaptures with f takes e3, black calmly plays queen e8, preparing to bring the queen into the attack or support the center. Queen e1, white's queen slides back, probably looking to regroup or defend some squares. Queen g6, black's queen makes a beeline for g6, putting some pressure on white's kingside pawns and maybe eyeing h3. Queen h4, white's queen chases after black's knight and tries to keep things active on the kingside. Rook f7, black doubles down on the f-file, bringing the rook up to support the queen and control those critical squares. Rook f2, white mirrors the rook move, trying to hold the f-file and keep the defense tight. Rook a f8, black stacks the rooks on the f-file, building up some serious pressure. Rook a f1, white isn't backing down, doubling rooks on the f-file as well. This is shaping up to be a tense tug of war. d5, now here's a move that shakes things up. Black pushes the d-pawn forward, challenging the center and opening lines. E takes d5, white captures, keeping the center fluid and trying to maintain balance. E takes d5, black recaptures, and the tension in the center is heating up. e4, white tries to grab some space and kick black's pieces back. D takes e4, black snaps the pawn, opening lines and keeping the center dynamic. Queen takes e4, white's queen scoops up the pawn, staying active in the center. Queen takes e4, black boldly trades queens off the board. This is a critical moment. Black's queen exchange here simplifies into a favorable endgame. D takes e4, white recaptures, but now black's slight material edge starts to show. Knight f4, black's knight jumps into a powerful outpost, threatening to cause some real headaches. Knight takes f4, white decides to trade knights, probably to relieve the pressure. Rook takes f4, black's rook recaptures, and suddenly black's pieces are humming with activity. Rook e1, white tries to contest the e-file, but black's position is already looking slick. Knight d4, black's knight hops into the center with authority, threatening forks and keeping white on their toes. c3, white tries to kick that knight away, but here's where things get spicy. The engine screams that a better move would have been rook e3, which would have kept more tension and control. Knight takes f3 check, black doesn't hesitate to capture on f3 with check, ripping open white's kingside. G takes f3, white has no choice but to recapture, but the king's safety is compromised. Rook takes f3, black's rook swoops in, gobbling up the pawn and cementing a strong material advantage. Rook takes f3, white grabs black's rook on f3, trying to claw back some material. Rook takes f3, black doesn't miss a beat and recaptures immediately, keeping that extra pawn and the pressure on. King g2, white's king sidesteps to g2, probably hoping to stay safe, but honestly, it feels a bit slow here. The engine even hints that rook d1 would have been sharper, putting more heat on black's position. Rook f4, black's rook slides over to f4, eyeing some pesky pawns and tightening the noose. The engine suggests rook d3 would have been even nastier, but hey, rook f4 does the job. King g3, white's king ventures forward, trying to get active, but it's like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight at this point. King f7, black's king steps up to f7, ready to support the pawns and rook in this endgame dance. Rook e2, white's rook moves to e2, maybe aiming to challenge black's rook or defend some weak spots. King e6, black's king marches boldly into the center, flexing its muscles and asserting dominance. h4, white pushes the h-pawn, trying to create some counterplay on the flank. Admirable, but the big picture says black's still in the driver's seat. h5, black responds immediately, shutting down white's pawn push and keeping the kingside locked tight. b4, white tries to stir the pot on the queenside, pushing the b-pawn forward. b5, black calmly pushes back, maintaining control and preparing to open lines. King h3, white's king sneaks over to h3, maybe hoping to support the h-pawn, but it's a bit of a sitting duck now. Rook g4, black's rook swings over to g4, threatening to pick off pawns and restrict white's king. This rook is basically the boss of this board now. Rook e3, white's rook tries to hold the line, but it's like putting a band-aid on a sinking ship. c6, black pushes the c-pawn forward, creating a passed pawn that's just begging to promote. Rook e2, white's rook shuffles back to e2, desperately trying to keep things together. a6, black pushes the a-pawn, supporting the queenside advance and tightening the noose even more. Rook e3, white repeats the rook move, hoping for a miracle that's not coming. King d6, black's king steps forward to d6, centralizing perfectly and ready to escort those pawns to glory. Rook e2, white's rook goes back to e2 again, the definition of running out of ideas. c5, black pushes the c-pawn again, breaking open lines and threatening unstoppable promotion. The engine says king e6 would have been even cleaner, but this works just fine. Rook e3, white's rook tries to stay active, but it's like watching a hamster on a wheel, lots of effort, no progress. c4, black pushes the pawn to c4, sealing the deal and leaving white with nothing but sad faces and resignation looming. Rook e2, white's rook shuffles back to e2, like a DJ stuck on repeat. King c6, black's king steps up to c6, inching closer to the action, no rush but definitely no chill. Rook e3, white's rook hops back to e3, clearly hoping for a different outcome this time. Spoiler alert, it's not coming. King b6, black's king slides over to b6, cozying up to those queenside pawns like a boss. Rook e2, white's rook retreats again to e2, stuck in a loop of despair. a5, black pushes the a-pawn forward, trying to crack open the queenside. But wait, the engine's whispering king c6 would have been sharper here. Missed opportunity, but hey, still good enough to keep the pressure. Rook e3, white's rook comes back to e3, like a boomerang that just won't quit. A takes b4, black captures on b4, snagging a pawn and increasing the lead. The engine suggests a4 would have been nastier, but this capture still puts white on the back foot. A takes b4, white recaptures, trying to keep the queenside intact, but the damage is done. King c6, black's king marches back to c6, keeping the pressure cooker hot. Rook e2, white's rook shuffles back to e2, still stuck in that sad little dance. King d6, black's king steps forward to d6, flexing those central muscles like a champ. Rook d2 check, white throws in a check, trying to rattle black's king. Cute, but not game-changing. King c6, black calmly sidesteps to c6, like, nice try, buddy. Rook e2, white's rook retreats again, the definition of stuck in a rut. Rook f4, black rook slides over to f4, eyeing those pawns and tightening the grip. The engine hints that king d7 would have been even better, but rook f4 still keeps white's king boxed in. Rook e3, white's rook hops back to e3, like a broken record stuck on the same sad tune. The engine suggests king g3 would have been a bit more active, but it's too little, too late. g6, black pushes the g-pawn, solidifying the kingside fortress and preparing for the final push. King g3, white's king finally steps up to g3, trying to get some breathing room. Rook g4 check, black's rook checks on g4, corralling white's king like a sheepdog. King h3, white's king retreats to h3, stuck in the corner like a kid sent to timeout. King d6, black's king strolls back to d6, ready to support the final assault. Rook e2, white's rook shuffles back to e2, still trying to find a miracle that's nowhere in sight. Rook f4, black's rook slides back to f4, keeping the noose tight and the victory inevitable. King g3, white's king tiptoes over to g3, desperately sniffing for some hope. King e6, black's king marches up to e6, like, I'm here to finish this party. Rook e3, white's rook hops back to e3, still clinging to life like a cat with 9 lives. King f6, black's king steps forward to f6, tightening the noose with surgical precision. King h3, white's king retreats to h3, basically waving a white flag in slow motion. g5, black pushes the g-pawn forward, saying, let's open some doors, for me. H takes g5 check, white captures on g5 with check, trying to stir the pot. King takes g5, black's king gobbles up the pawn, no mercy here. King g3, white's king shuffles back to g3, stuck in a tragic loop of futility. Rook g4 check, black's rook checks on g4, corralling white's king like a pro shepherd. But hold up, the engine's whispering that h4 check would have been even nastier. Missed chance to really rub it in. King f3, white's king scurries to f3, trying to dodge the storm. h4, black pushes the h-pawn, saying, time to close the net. King f2, white's king retreats to f2, basically running in circles now. King f4, black's king steps up to f4, but wait, engine says rook f4 check would have been a sharper dagger. Still, no complaints here. Rook h3, white's rook swings over to h3, trying to throw a wrench in the works. King takes e4, black's king gobbles the pawn on e4, now 2 pawns up and cruising. King e2, white's king steps to e2, inching closer but still outmatched. King f4, black's king returns to f4, flexing that material advantage like a boss. Rook f3 check, white's rook checks on f3, last-ditch effort to shake things up. King g5, black's king sidesteps to g5, unbothered and unshaken. Rook f8, white's rook slides to f8, trying to create some chaos. Rook g3, black's rook moves to g3, but the engine side-eyeing this one. Rook e4 check would have been a sharper move to seal the deal faster. Rook g8 check, white's rook checks on g8, waving a tiny flag of resistance. King f4, black's king calmly strolls back to f4, ready to wrap this up like a pro gift wrapper. Rook f8 check, white throws in a check with the rook sliding over to f8, trying to stir the pot. But honestly, black's sitting pretty with 2 extra pawns and a king ready to dance through the chaos. King e4, black's king struts right into the heart of the action, no fear, no hesitation. This king is basically saying, I'm the boss here. Rook h8, white's rook swings back to h8, clinging to life like a soap opera character who just won't quit. Rook takes c3, black's rook snatches that pawn on c3, padding the lead to 3 pawns. But hold up, engine's whispering that h3 would have been even nastier here. Missed chance to really crank the pressure. Rook takes h4 check, white grabs a pawn with check, trying to make something happen, but it's like swatting a fly with a sledgehammer, too little, too late. King d5, black's king marches forward, tightening the grip like a boa constrictor. No escape routes left. Rook h8, white's rook returns to h8, desperately waving a white flag in slow motion. Rook b3, black's rook slides over to b3, eyeing those weak pawns like a shark circling dinner. Rook d8 check. White tries to check again, but it's like throwing pebbles at a tank. Black's advantage is massive. King e4. Black's king calmly steps back to e4, unbothered and in total control. Rook c8. White's rook hops to c8, still trying to find some spark, but the engine's evaluation is screaming, nope. Rook takes b4. Black's rook gobbles another pawn on b4, increasing the lead. But again, a better move was available. Rook b2 check would have been a sharper dagger to the heart. King d2. White's king shuffles over to d2, stuck in a losing dance. Rook b3. Black's rook returns to b3, just waiting for the final curtain call. King c2. White's king inches to c2, but it's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. King d4. Black's king steps up to d4, dominating the center like a boss. Rook d8 check. White throws another check, but it's just noise at this point. King c5. Black's king sidesteps to c5, staying out of trouble and keeping the pressure on. Rook c8 check. White checks again, but the king just keeps dancing away. King b4. Black's king slides to b4, inching closer to the finish line. Rook e8. White's rook moves to e8, still trying to throw a wrench in the works. Rook e3. Black's rook jumps to e3, ready to cut off any escape routes. King d2. White's king shuffles back to d2, but it's all just rearranging the deck chairs again. Rook e4. Black's rook slides to e4, sealing the deal with style. The advantage is crushing, and White's resignation is just a formality now. Rook c8. Oh, look at White trying to sneak that rook over to c8 like it's going to save the day. Spoiler alert, it's not. The engine's already waving a big red flag here. Rook b8 would have been the move to keep some hope alive, but nope, White's just rearranging the deck chairs on the sinking ship. King b3. Black's king strolls right up to b3, like it owns the place. Honestly, with 3 extra pawns and a king this confident, White's got bigger problems than a rook on c8. Rook b8. White finally moves that rook back to b8, but it's like closing the barn door after the horses escaped. The engine's practically laughing with a -15 evaluation here. White's missed a chance to play rook h8 and maybe drag this out a bit longer. b4. Black pushes the pawn to b4, marching those extra pawns forward like an unstoppable freight train. White's position is crumbling faster than a cookie in milk. King d1. White's king retreats to d1, probably hoping for a miracle. Sorry buddy, miracles don't happen when you're down 3 pawns and facing a mate in 8. c3. Black's pawn storms to c3, and the engine is screaming, mate in 23. But wait, Black could have been even nastier with rook d4 check here. Talk about missing the perfect punch. Rook h8. White's rook swings back to h8, waving the white flag in slow motion. The engine still sees mate looming in 11 moves. White's just stalling at this point. c2 check. Black pushes c2 with check, forcing White's king to dance again. It's like watching a puppet show, except the strings are in Black's hands. King d2. White's king shuffles to d2, desperately trying to stay alive. Spoiler. It's not going to work. Rook d4 check. And here it is, the final blow. Black's rook slides to d4 with check, sealing the deal with a mate in 8 moves. White's resignation is just a formality now. Black played this endgame like a grandmaster, and White was left holding the bag. Alright folks, that's a wrap on this epic endgame demolition. Remember, when you're up 3 pawns and your king's this active, don't just shuffle around, push those pawns, cut off the king, and deliver the knockout punch. Thanks for sticking around, smash that like button if you enjoyed this roast, and I'll catch you in the next game where hopefully someone puts up a better fight. Stay sharp and keep those kings dancing.